I'm joined by Brizer, and we're going to discuss the 1993 action film, dystopian film, Demolition Man. Brizer, how are you?
Yes, I'm good betwixt. Yeah, good to be here again. And yeah, we'll have
All
a
right.
talk about this one.
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on in this one. Apart from
There
all
is.
the action, there's a lot to analyze. And I should ask you first and foremost, when was the first time you saw this film, and what were your initial impressions?
Yeah, well, I actually only saw it for the first time. I think it was last year, or maybe a year before that, but it wasn't that long ago, and I never really knew about it. And it was only just from chatter from other people that you'd see online, about this film Demolition Man, and it's worth watching because of the similarities of what's going on in our world right now that are in this film, which was made in 1993. And so I said, oh, right, okay, I've got to have a look at that. And yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, it's mainly an action film, there's a lot of that, but there's a lot of stuff in there which is certainly very interesting, and how we are actually seeing this unfold before us today. And I've noticed, like, a lot of the movies that we've reviewed in the past, all of them most of them have been made in the 90s. And which I think is kind of interesting, because that's when you could say this new liberal world order all kind of kicked off around then, didn't it? And everything that we've seen in those films are all unfolding as we speak. So, and this is just another one of them, and it was made in 1993. So yeah, we'll get into it.
I guess one of the reasons why we had so many of these types of films in the 90s was because a lot of people at the time, there was this feeling in the air that, the year 2000 was upon us, a new century, a new millennium. And a lot of people were very optimistic. And we probably overlooked, the negative aspects of what was coming down the tracks, technology and all that. Mm-hmm. We seem to have no qualms whatsoever with indulging in the latest technology, and we felt that the 40-hour week could be a thing of the past in our own lifetimes. And these films, especially this one, it does remind us that there's no free lunch. If you want to have it easy, you're not going to have much, or if any, semblance of freedom. So we'll get into it. Demolition Man, 1993. The initial scene is set in 1996. Now, I watched this film as a kid in 1994. I watched it on VHS. And I remember when the writing came up on the screen, 1996, it seemed so futuristic. 2 years previously in 1994. But yeah, the initial scene is one of action. We have John Spartan. He's a cop. He's known as the Demolition Man, and he doesn't like the rule book. He's not that type of cop, He doesn't like the rule book. He's the type of cop who will throw away the rule book and save the damsel in distress. And his nemesis in 1996 is played by Wesley Snipes, a character called Simon Phoenix. Now, the word Phoenix obviously has a reason, and we'll get into that. But Spartan has been sent on a quest, and the quest is to save hostages held by Simon Phoenix. We find out later that the hostages were already dead, but at the time, the police force didn't know this, the government didn't know this, and the building, there was a bomb, the bomb was activated, and the building blew up, and at the time, everyone believed that hostages were killed because of this bomb. And therefore, John Spartan and Simon Phoenix, they were both treated as criminals. and they had to be, as punishment, they had to be cryogenically frozen. And yeah, it's called a cryo prison in the movie. So they were frozen, and I think Phoenix was the first one to be reanimated in the year 2032, so 36 years later. And Phoenix, he's risen from the ashes, and he's much stronger than he was in 1996. He suddenly has, all these skills that he didn't have in 1996. He's a martial arts expert. He's a successful hacker. He has all these skills, innate skills, and they've been given to him as part of the program. But obviously the program itself is corrupt. He's been brought back. He's been reanimated by I suppose he's like the leader of this new city that's called San Angeles, because Los Angeles was just a total kip. It had to be revamped, and it's now San Angeles, and it's a utopia. It's pacifist in nature, and the leader has, I suppose he's like the president of San Angeles, or the mayor. He's brought Simon Phoenix back because he wants him to kill a vigilante who lives in the sewers with his merry men and his merry women. So that's the reason he's brought back. And the first thing he does is he kills the warden, and then he kills 2 more people. And the police are absolutely bamboozled when they get the message at the police station saying that there's been an MDK, murder, death, kill. It hasn't happened in something like 12 years, and suddenly 3 people have been killed in the space of a few minutes. So they try to apprehend this guy, Phoenix, and they're not used to violence, the police. They don't have guns. They're a pack of pussies, and they get. I think some of them might have been killed in the scene anyway, but they get destroyed by Simon Phoenix, and they don't know how are they going to deal with this Simon Phoenix. They're not used to dealing with criminals in their utopia, and a suggestion is made that maybe they should bring back the Demolition Man. So Spartan is reanimated, and his job is to take on Simon Phoenix. And, well, there's a lot of action scenes. We'll get into more things in this film, but eventually Spartan is able to defeat Phoenix. He's able to kill him for good. And at the end, there is this instability because nobody knows how they're going to develop the new society. And we'll get into that perhaps at the very end. So, Brizer, I'll ask you a few questions. Now, if there's anything you want to bring up yourself, feel free. The first thing I wanted to ask you about is, in this movie, in the future, in 2032, there's no physical contact. When you greet people, you can't shake their hands, you can't give them a hug, you can't give them 5, you can't, give them a fist pump. There's none of that. Physical contact is a no-no. When you watch this movie, did it bring back perhaps any memories for you? The idea that you can't have physical contact with people in your community.
Yeah, well, it's only very recent times, isn't it? The good old elbow bump. Remember that one? Because, could be spreading germs. So we had this ludicrous idea of bumping elbows. And it's incredible how many people went along with that nonsense, I mean, if anybody approached me and said, put out their elbow, I'd be putting out my hand. And they'd be like, oh, no, can't be doing that now. I said, yes, we can. But it's quite amazing, just seeing that. And also the whole, what's it? Happy niceness, or what were the greetings that they had?
Oh God, I looked them up. Something like greetings and salutations.
Salutations and happy nicey day and all this kind of stuff. And
it sounds like American, American corporate speak.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and yeah, that was that was interesting to see that, and to see that actually happen. So it's funny when you see these in movies from way back, like from the 90s, which is now 30 years ago. And here it is now playing out in real life. Yeah, you really have to wonder, like, what's going on here? Were they able to predict this? What do you think? I mean, this is what always kind of boggles me about what kind of reality we're living in. Is it scripted? Is it a construct? Is it some kind of simulation, or was it all planned this way and just subtly introduced over time? That's one thing that always got me. But what do you take on that?
Yeah, I think you've raised some very good points. It seems that they know more about us than we know about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the scamdemic there. Like I remember putting my hand out to a man, quote unquote man, and he was absolutely flustered. He looked disgusted. He looked at me as though I were trying to spread some deadly virus, and he then kind of sheepishly stuck out his elbow, and I looked at his elbow, and then I looked at him as if to say, what the fuck?
What am I supposed to grab your elbow?
Yeah, like are we supposed to do a chicken dance? What's going on here? But the scary thing is, and we've spoken about this on numerous occasions, and I believe we'll continue speaking about this for many more numerous occasions. Overnight, they're able to change the culture overnight. They're able to change how we interact socially. They can outlaw the handshake, and 98% of people will suddenly overnight say, oh, handshakes are dirty. No, handshakes are dirty. The Mediterranean countries, generally, when they greet each other, there's the 2 kisses on the cheek for a woman. That just disappeared overnight. And as I say, they know the masses better than the masses know themselves. And that's a very scary thought. And in this movie, the people who wrote it, and I should have done this at the very start. I should just give some names here. It was released on October 8th, 1993 in the USA. The director was Marco Brambilla, and it's distributed by Warner Brothers. It says that it was adapted from Brave New World. Now, I read Brave New World, and obviously there are similarities. One of the characters, the woman, is called, Lenina Huxley.
Lenina, yeah.
And Huxley would be Aldous Huxley, the writer of Brave New World. Lenina is a character in Brave New World. Obviously, there are similarities, but I wouldn't say it's adapted. I wouldn't say it's adapted from it.
I wouldn't. There's certainly, it's been a lot of influences there, but not.
Yeah. I also read that there's, I think, a novel by H.G. Wells. It also has connections there. But yeah, it's an original movie in itself. But yeah, there was something else I wanted to ask you, and that was, it's later on in the movie, but Huxley, when she's speaking to Spartan, well, we should probably mention this because we've already laid the groundwork here, Brizer. We've spoken about the idea of no physical contact, so you can imagine that sexual intercourse is a serious no-no in this utopian, dystopian world. Would you like to tell us about the sex scene, which, for us wouldn't be really a sex scene at all, but it kind of brings together the idea of sex and technology?
Yeah, this is a scene where John Spartan, played by Sylvester Stallone, and Lenina Huxley, played by Sandra Bullock, they're kind of working together at a point, and they go out to a dinner party. We can kind of go back to that again, but they end up back in her place, and she literally comes straight out and says, "Would you like to have sex?" And of course, John Spartan's kind of taken aback by that and kind of like, "Right here, like now?" Right? And she says, "Yes." And like he's going, "Whoa, well, okay." She says, "Okay, hang on a minute." And she goes off into another room to get into something more comfortable, I suppose, slip into something more comfortable. And puts on the theme music to Love Boat, I think, which was an American sitcom back in the 70s, I think, maybe into the 70s anyway, which is kind of funny as well when you think about it. There's a lot of that in it, theme music and jingles for advertisements that people sing along to, which is crazy. But anyway, and she comes back out and she's got two like what kind of like helmets or things, or something that you put on your head anyway. And obviously it just puts suggestions into your head, into both people's head, and you're kind of connected that way. You're connected electronically, I suppose. They both sit opposite each other. There's no human contact whatsoever. And he's like wondering what the hell's going on here. And then he's getting these impulses, whatever. And it's this kind of buys into this whole thing of that sex is suddenly now a bad thing, reproduction is a bad thing, but you can do it artificially, and this is the artificial world that we're going to be moving in, the AI world. And sex robots and things like that. And so that was an interesting scene, that one. And when they actually do reach a point of orgasm, but it's all in your head because it's just impulses going into your head. There's actually nothing physical or deep or spiritual about it. It's just totally artificial, and that's the type of world that John Spartan has woken up into. He was, as I said, cryogenically frozen in 1996, and he wakes up in 2032. Now, that's an interesting year, isn't it? 2032. We all heard about Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, and all of that. So it's just, and it's kind of interesting how the world has changed so much from 1996 to 2032, which is only a period of what, 34 years or something like that. So yeah, that was interesting. And again, as I said, we're seeing a lot of that now. A lot of these online sex bots, all this stuff online. Obviously, pornography is rife online as well. And there's this disconnect now between people that it's very hard these days to even just go out and try and find a mate, and because it's all easily done now, you can just do it online. You can go on this, this dating app, Grindr or whatever it's called, and you can hook up with whoever, an absolute stranger, and kind of get it on. It's very disconcerting. I thought that whole thing. It's a funny kind of enough scene in the film, but then when you think about it, that is happening here and now, and where is it going to go to from here? Is the next question.
Yeah. It's even in our time now, sex isn't really for reproduction. It's just for pleasure.
Yeah.
And you have the pill, the morning after pill, whatever. So most people are just going out and seeking pleasure, and the idea of bringing a life into the world is considered old-fashioned, especially by, I would say, young women now. The idea of having children, obviously economically, it's not viable for them. They know that, but it's also considered old-fashioned, motherhood, etc. Now, in this movie in 2032, Huxley, when Spartan mentions, he takes off the headset, the virtual reality helmet, whatever, and he's like, because it seems to be kind of psychedelic, the experience. It's like he doesn't like it, and he pulls it off and says, let's just do it the old-fashioned way. And she immediately goes, ugh, the exchange of bodily fluids is considered disgusting, you know. And, you know, I don't know, I think she mentions diseases and all that, probably HIV, and then after HIV came something worse. And it's she's been conditioned from birth to loathe, to be disgusted by the idea of physical contact, and especially, you know, copulation, sex, making love, call it what you will. She mentions then that, you know, you need a license to become pregnant. So you need to get a license before you can become pregnant. But I think she says in the movie that you get the baby from a factory. I might be wrong. I'd have to look back over the script or rewatch the movie. But I think she does mention that, you know, it's more or less the baby is made for you.
Yeah.
And you get it from a factory. She also says that you need a license for abortion. So not only do you need a license for pregnancy, but you also need a license then for your abortion. So it's kind of very much like the nanny state. And we have this preconceived notion when we think of totalitarianism, you know, a dystopia. We immediately think of England, Britain, and, you know, you got a license for that license. And this is more or less this world. You need a license for everything in this. Obviously, we're getting very close to that point now. You mentioned as well, Brizer, the music. Like the music is, because we mentioned in a previous movie review how music is kind of dead now. Originality is gone. And I said they're just putting tracks on top of tracks on top of tracks. And it's reached such a scenario here that, as you said, they listen to jingles, advertisements. so it's a very good scene, and it's very funny when Spartan is in the car with Huxley and the other guy, Garcia, I think is his name, and they turn on the radio and they start singing along to an ad for Armour hot dogs, and Spartan is looking around like, what the fuck is going on here? And then he says to them, please put me back in the fridge. So, yeah. And speaking of the fridge, we should get into the whole idea of rehabilitation. What do you make of this? How they rehabilitate the convicts in this brave new world?
Yeah, well, it's again, it's a re-education camp, isn't it? Completely changing your whole mindset and how everything is supposed to work, and we're going to do it now the new way, the new society. You know, this is how we do it, and This is, I think, is very much taken from like the Brave New World, as is the whole thing about children being brought up into the new world. They're made in a hatchery, you know, under very controlled scientific conditions, and so. But again, this is like, you know, this is where the whole concept of political correctness all came in from, you know. That you can't say this, you can't do that. People can get offended, you know, and you have to be nice to each other. Now, that was another thing that's right through this film, is how everybody is very nice and everything is happy and pleasant. It's a utopia, and we just have to kind of keep it that way, and you'll be very happy. You'll be happy, you know. You'll own nothing and be happy, sort of thing, you know. So. Yeah, that's you know they don't torture people, you know, that's, you know, because violence is, we don't like violence too much, you know, that's not a good thing. It's very savage and very primitive, so we'll do it nicely, you know. It's tyranny with a smiley face, basically, is what we're seeing here, and And that's what the whole Brave New World concept is all about, where people will enjoy their slavery so much that they'll hardly notice that they're slaves within it. I think Huxley even said that in one of his quotes. I think he said that's what the book was about.
Yeah, if they could, re-evaluate the idea of happiness, people would follow it. And in Brave New World, you have a caste system. You've alphas and betas, epsilon, whatever. And in this film, the convicts are rehabilitated. But again, it's not the idea of, we'll try and make you a better person. We'll try and make you have discipline. We'll try and get you to learn things by yourself. It's very, very passive. They just use a computer to rewire the brain. And in this case, Phoenix becomes, as I've already said, he becomes a genius when it comes to technology, hacking into systems, martial arts. He seems to be a lot more intelligent than he was. So it gets into the idea of genetic engineering in a way. Spartan is given just one skill, and that is knitting. he becomes quite a decent knitter, and he doesn't even know it. And this is very sneaky as well, that they're reanimated, and they have their memories from the previous century and all that, and they seem to have an idea of their skills. But unbeknownst to Spartan, he's in his apartment one night watching the TV, and for some reason he has knitting needles and a ball of wool, and he starts knitting like a pro. I think he knits a scarf or something, and he knows all the different techniques of knitting.
Yeah.
Whereas Phoenix has been given incredible skills, life-changing skills. And when I watched this recently, I was thinking of affirmative action, where if you've got someone who's based on race, for example, they're not able to compete with someone of another race, then you change the rules. You give them a step up to try and be on an equal playing field and all that. But in this case, he's really boosted up. He's almost like a god in this. He can more or less throw like 4 men into the air at the same time. We get into as well, you have self-driving cars in this, so I guess that was expected. And in fairness, in a lot of futuristic films, that's quite common, the idea of self-driving cars. There's a blasphemy law. Certain words will trigger an alarm, and you'll have this voice, it's in a clipped British accent, telling you that you have committed a crime and you will get a fine. And it happens in this film a lot that, for example, John Spartan, he might say fuck or he might say shit. And then there's a kind of a beep, and then there's a British voice saying, John Spartan, you have, etc., 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 fine of whatever. And then he'll say, oh, for fuck's sake. And then there'll be another fine put on top of that. So this is something that back then, in 1993, we were already starting to be careful with our words. Words like racist were starting to be used. I know in Ireland it was a slow process, but it was starting to seep into the public consciousness. Oh, you don't want to be a racist, or you don't want to be this or that. You don't want to be a bigot. And these are spell words that stop us from having, or at least communicating, opinions. And in this world, everything is recorded. This system can pick up anything. The microphone could be, God only knows, it could be 20 meters away on a wall. There could be lots of background noise, but it would be able to pick up exactly what you said and punish you accordingly. So this is something, what did you make of that, the whole thing of, I just call it a blasphemy law. I know some people might disagree with me, but I just call it a blasphemy law.
Yeah. It's the technological version of the swear box, isn't it? Where you say a naughty word and you have to put a penny in the swear box, to give to the poor black babies in Africa. So, it's but yeah, that's again a common thread. It's a surveillance state. Everyone knows what you're doing. Everything's on camera. They can hear everything. And that voice that comes out of that box, by the way, is the voice of Nigel Hawthorne, who plays Dr. Raymond Cocteau in this film, who's the kind of the great leader in San Angeles. Which is, by the way, I just saw the merger of San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Los Angeles, and it's now a megalopolis. It's one of these smart cities. That's what it is. You say electric cars everywhere, self-driving cars, and yeah, again, and you were talking about licenses as well earlier. Have to have a license for this and a license for that, and we're kind of getting on. We're seeing more and more of that. And a license, if you actually look what that is, it just means you're getting permission from an authority to do something. You have to have permission. It's like, please, sir, can I have some more? It's begging to the authority to have a little bit of freedom for a few crumbs off the table. But they get enough crumbs to keep them happy. The plebs get enough crumbs to keep them happy, and so they're all right. And we're living in this nice, pacifist, peaceful society where there's no violence and there's no terrible things going on, and you should be happy. And anybody who doesn't go along with this, well, we don't really know what happens to people who don't go along with it, because no one does. Everyone in the society seems to go along with this. But then there's an underground as well, which we'll go on to, that an underground who are literally based underground of people who didn't go along with this, and they're called the scraps, which I think is interesting. Scraps of food, like crumbs of food. And they're obviously hungry a lot of the time, and they come up above onto the surface, to get what they can, and then go back underground again. And they're seen as a bit of a threat, and that's again the reason why Phoenix is brought back, because this Raymond Cocteau guy, he doesn't like this bunch of reprobates living underground, and he wants Phoenix to come in and deal with them and kill them all. And so these are obviously, these people aren't going along with the system, and they're living on the ground, as I say. And again, a lot of references to Brave New World and this, about the savages who are living on the reservation outside of the Brave New World. So definitely a very Brave New World theme to this, but not based on it. And actually, the other book that was we thought it was going to be based on was the H.G. Wells book called The Sleeper Awakes, which is about a guy who goes to sleep for 203 years and wakes up in London, 203 years later, and it's a totally different place, H.G. Wells is another very interesting character. A lot of very interesting books and movies have been made, based on his books. So all dealing with this type of utopian type of futures that are awaiting us all. And when you look at this Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum view of the world, that's exactly what they want. They want a total surveillance state where you have to have a license for everything. You can't say this, you can't do that. But it will be living in a very peaceful world, and all will be good and all will be happy, but you'll own nothing. You'll have no freedom. You won't own yourself. You won't own your soul. And you'll just have enough crumbs just to keep you contented. And that's it. That's your life. Well, no thanks. That's my take on that. And I'm not sure if they'll even get there, but that's another conversation. But yeah, back to you.
Yeah, they are trying to get there, and
yeah.
we've heard recently about, they create the emergency. They created out of thin air bird flu, and suddenly, oh, no, you need permission to have a chicken.
Yeah.
We can't have people eating healthier organic eggs. Like I know lots of people back home who have hens, and they have a surplus of eggs, and they'll go around houses just giving them away.
Yeah.
And you eat one of those eggs, like you can't compare it to the egg you get in a supermarket.
Oh.
Governments, these systems of control, they despise the idea that an ordinary person can create their own food, can organize themselves so that they can get their own organic food, and cut out the middleman and cut out the government. They absolutely hate the idea, and so they create these bullshit pandemics and whatever. You mentioned H.G. Wells there, Brizer. I'm still slowly getting through the Time Machine, and if I'm not mistaken, recently I was reading a bit where Wells is describing the people living above ground and the people living below ground. The Morlocks, I think, are the ones underground. Who are the ones living above ground?
I can't.
Right. It doesn't
can't
matter.
remember the name. Yeah, but they're a kind of.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Because you mentioned in our previous movie review that the people living above ground, and in the movie, they're just beautiful people. They look very Aryan, very kind of Scandinavian, you would say, very blonde hair, blue eyes, and all that. And when I was reading the novel recently, it was explained that the people living above ground, they were the aristocrats. They were the well-to-do people in Britain, the upper class. And they began to, because they had so much free time, because they were living off, they're living off the working class, They had so much free time, they could indulge in sensuality and all the rest of it, which made them weak and made them vulnerable. And those living below ground were the common folk who had to travel using the subway, the underground, perhaps work in mines, this type of thing. They became used to living underground. They became used to living in a kind of dark world. And when you read things like this from H.G. Wells, you get the impression that he did not hold the working class in high esteem. No. You get the feeling he was very much into the idea that we were not just two different classes, we were two different species altogether. And with time, with decades, with centuries, that would eventually happen, that it would divide into two different species. I think it's a very interesting topic, this idea of humans breaking into two species. And for all we know, there could be people, they look like people, but perhaps they are now a completely different species, and they have been for 100,000 years. It's just we don't know it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's probably something to what David Icke says about reptilians. Whether there's a different species, because they certainly look human, but they don't behave that way. And I'm also saying that I think there could be a flip, because we're hearing about all these super rich people who are buying all these underground bases and places to live, and spending millions and millions on it. And also these, what they call DUMBs, D-U-M-B, which is deep underground military bases that are allegedly all over the place, particularly in the US, but I think also across Europe as well. So there's this kind of people living above ground, people underground, and we always think of people who are underground, they're always the people who are fighting back, against the people in charge who are above ground. But it seems to be going in the reverse now, and the controllers want to go underground because they kind of remain out of sight, out of mind type of thing. But they have the technology to control things above ground, and I think we're kind of seeing a lot of that now. And you probably heard about this underground cave or tunnel or something that they have in Norway. It's under a mountain where they're growing all this amazing food crops. None of them are genetically modified. They're all grow in a natural environment, but it's underground. But it's a huge place. It's a huge resource of food for if, when the shit does hit the fan, which it could do any time, they have got a food resource hidden away there. And then I have to wonder about places like CERN in Switzerland, I mean, is there really a halogen collider underneath there? Or is this just one big underground city that the elite are building for themselves? I don't know. We don't know. I mean, our mutual friend Ogner, who lives in Geneva, like CERN is just outside Geneva, and he knows a few people who work there, but nobody knows what the other guy is doing. There's all this compartmentalization going on, so nobody knows what someone in the other office is doing, and it's all that whole chain where you just do your job, and the guy in the next office does his job, and the guy in the next office does his job, and it just goes all the way up. So it's interesting. We're seeing a lot of themes around that, and we're seeing it in this film as well. But of course, in this movie, it's the people who are rebelling against the system, who've gone underground and are trying to fight back and are trying to maybe take over at some point. But because they haven't got any resources at all, they might have a few guns here and there, but that's not enough because it's a technological society that's above ground, and there's so much surveillance that they can't get any kind of foothold at all. So yeah, lots of very interesting themes in this film, where you can really see where this is going, and how these guys, when they made this film back in '93, obviously had a clue, obviously, that this is the type of world we're going to develop. Because where are they getting ideas like this to make films like this? Who's okay? You might read Brave New World, or you might read H.G. Wells or whatever. But to actually come out and make movies like this, depicting what the future is going to be like, and being very accurate in many ways, it's kind of mind-boggling, that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess in some cases they have a good imagination, so maybe they are reading some of the classics and then comparing it to now and trying to project where we'll be. But yeah, it is a bit strange how a lot of things seem to come to pass. And I did a stream a few years ago with an American guy. It was about Philip K. Dick, and similarly, he was actually, so it is said anyway, he was contacted. I think the feds came to him because they were reading his books and they wanted to know where the hell he was getting his information. So there is that where fact and fiction, there's a very, very thin veneer between the two.
There is.
We mentioned, Brizer, when we did that movie review of Margin Call, the idea of everything being compartmentalized. No one knows what the guy on the other side of the office or the other side of the factory is really doing. And this is the perfect system when all the workers are working away like slaves, but they don't have a clue of the overall picture. No. Yeah. And you said about, these bunkers where they're growing food and all that. Like, I do wonder, I've seen documentaries about Krakatoa, and they say that when that volcano erupted, it caused famines all over the world because you had ash in the atmosphere for years. It was very thick and the sun couldn't really penetrate it, and crops failed and all the rest. And I often wonder with the whole chemtrails thing, is because I don't travel around very often, but when I do travel around, wherever I go, even if it's a small town here in Spain, I arrive, let's say in the morning, the sky is blue and I see the plains. And we're talking about towns of perhaps 10,000 inhabitants, which is very small in Spain. And it's wherever you go, the plains are there, they're spraying. And an hour later, 2 hours later, there's that blanket and you can't really see the sun at all. And I do wonder, is it part of somebody's plan anyway? It might not come to fruition, but are they trying to see, what they can do exactly? Because it boils down to the idea, I mentioned it with the hens and the eggs and having a little bit of self-sufficiency. Mm-hmm. The sun is a fantastic energy source. If you're sick, if you've got a cold, whatever, I think there's almost nothing better than going out if you've got a bit of sun and sitting out in the sun for half an hour, depending on how strong it is, whatever. It's a remarkable thing. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely hate when I see the planes blocking it out. They're cutting off people's connection with the sun. And, the idea of light as well, illumination, I find it very, very annoying. Annoying doesn't really cut it, but anyway. I'll get into this. The utopia itself, it's unaccustomed to violence. So, through the whatever, engineering the brain, creating people in a factory, education, re-education, rehabilitation, all these buzzwords, they have more or less cut out violence in this place. They've cut it out. And therefore the cops, the only thing they have to contend with generally is, you've mentioned them already, the underground movement. They're known as the scraps. And the scraps, all they seem to do is they have like some little machines that peep up out of the ground and they spray graffiti on the wall. But no sooner is the graffiti sprayed than it's rubbed out by the system. So you kind of wonder, what was the point? What was the point of trying to spray the wall? Because it just gets, within like probably less than a second, it's just erased. But yeah, it's an unviolent society in general, and the cops don't have guns. They're not used to violence at all. And when Phoenix goes on the rampage and they try to arrest him, I mentioned it at the start, they get BTFO'd. But even when they're trying to arrest him, before they get beaten up, they don't know how to handle it. So they have to, it's like they look up the internet to ask for instructions. It's like Alexa, how do I arrest somebody? It's like, okay, and then he tells them to fuck off or something. And then they're like, okay, what do I do if the suspect has told me to, fuck off? And then, so they're going through all these steps, but they're just over, they're completely over their heads in this one. And I do think, like, I noticed, it's slightly off topic here, but I noticed, I watched a video clip there this morning, and it was in Spain. I don't know where in Spain. I think it was in Bilbao. It was a number of cops. So you had perhaps 100 sub-Saharan Africans selling illegal goods, and the cops turned up to try and get them to move on. And there was a bit of back and forth, but the Africans were moving away, and the cops were following them slowly but surely. And I noticed, because when you look around here, when you're out and about, I would say 30% of the cops here are female, but in this situation, all the cops were men. Mm-hmm. So they didn't send any women out on this errand. And if we get back to this, the fact that in this, future dystopia, the idea of murder is so unknown. They call it an MDK, so they have a fancy acronym for it: murder, death, kill. And it's really unsettled them that not only has there been one murder, death, kill of the warden, but then two other prison officers have been killed. And then I'm sure some of the cops were killed when they tried to arrest Phoenix. But the funny thing is, we talk about the scraps, and I would say, because what's the guy's name? Friendly. He's like the leader. But as far as I know, he's a libertarian. He doesn't like the idea of laws. He doesn't like the idea of rules. And therefore, he doesn't have any real long-term strategy. His whole idea is to make things difficult for Dr. Cocteau. That's all. He doesn't really care about anything else. So it's not a serious movement. And as you said, they're really just trying to live hand to mouth, trying to, go up to the streets and steal some food now and then. We know that they eat rats in the sewers. They make burgers out of them. They've more or less made a decision. They don't like this quote unquote utopia. They don't like all these rules, all this red tape, and they've decided to literally go underground to live in a world where there aren't really any rules. But that means poverty. That means a lot of inconvenience. It means living in a disease-ridden environment. And I thought that was an interesting contrast. You can have a nice, clean existence. You can have a very safe existence. Physically, you in this case, you'll be healthy. The thing is, you have to follow an incredible number of rules in order to live in this, above ground place. However, if you go underground, you can forget about all these rules. You can live a kind of, in one way, a less stressful life, but that does mean that you will probably go hungry a lot. It means you might get sick and you could die because it's not the best. Sewers are not the best environment, if you get an infection or something like that. So, yeah, the graffiti as well. I just thought that was funny. That seems to be like Cocteau. All he has to deal with is graffiti, really, and these scraps now and then stealing something. Mm-hmm. This shows you the type of person who would run a totalitarian system. They cannot accept any sort of challenge, no matter how small, to their power. Cocteau, the idea that friendly exists, that these people exist, that they have rejected his utopia, is enough to make him reanimate, a known criminal, a known murderer, to take out Friendly and his crew. Do you have anything to say about this, Brizer?
Yeah, it's not much difference really. Let's go back to say H.G. Wells and what he was writing about in his time, or even go back to say Charles Dickens and Victorian England. You had the elite of the time who had everything. They lived in the big houses. They had servants. They had the best of food and wine and you name it. And they lived this very orderly, controlled life, where there was all these expectations that you had to live up to, and you can't say this. You have to. I'm trying to explain. You have to live up to a certain standard, right? And then 90% of the population were the plebs living in the slums, living on things like rats or whatever they could get their hands on to live, and then maybe trying to steal something from the rich, out in the streets, got to pick a pocket or two, as in Oliver Twist, that type of story, and they had their own rules and their own way of doing things as well. And there was a kind of a decorum there too, where you had to follow those rules while you were living in that kind of a system. And, you had little gangs and mafias all setting up under that little system. So it hasn't really changed, except just technology has changed and you have a new elite now in charge. And again, this whole idea of violence, well, we abhor violence, we can't have that. So we, and people are trained obviously from birth, that this is the way it's to be, and nobody knows any better. Nobody even knows what violence is. And if you look at the police forces, we're talking about the police force in this film, right? they're all dumb as a bag of hammers. The whole lot of them, they haven't a clue what to do in a situation. As you said, their only job was to look out for these the scrap guys who were putting a bit of graffiti up, or maybe causing a little bit of trouble here and there. Or, if you said too many bad words on the machine, and you could be reported to the bad language department of the cops. And then you'd be brought back, and you would be, you had probes put on you, and told you can't say words like that. It's not good in this society. It's illegal. You notice that everything is illegal in this as well. Sex is illegal. Oh, another one, eating meat is illegal. We're talking about, this has gone back to the 90s, and look what they're talking about now, banning meat. Let's get rid of the cows. They're farting too much, Climate change. Meat's bad for the environment, all the rest of it. And so they're promoting all that, the whole vegan thing now has been heavily pushed. Not saying in particular that a vegan diet is particularly bad for you. I know a lot of vegans who actually seem to be doing quite well in it. I mean, each to their own on their diet. But, humanity has been living on meat for a long time, and are doing quite well on it. So the fact that has to go because it's a violent act of like butchering that poor cow and eating its parts, And the eggs as well, that's coming from the poor chicken, and that could be a new little chicken that could grow up, and you're going to eat it. And then milk, you can't drink that raw milk because it's full of those pesky germs, you see. So it has to be pasteurized, and you can't go to a farmer and buy a bucket of raw milk because, no, I can't be having that. It's unclean, you notice as well as hygiene is a major thing in it, so the bodily fluids, the act of kissing or having sex or anything like that, bodily fluid interchange, Oh, terrible, it's all the germophobia, And that's what we've seen in the last few years. People afraid to shake hands, people afraid to hug. And I'm sure you had plenty of cases in the last few years where married couples were probably afraid to kiss each other, right? Or kiss their kids even, you know what I mean? Because they're afraid they're going to pass on a germ which has never even been proven to exist. Okay, well, that's another story. But this is the type of programming and you can see how subtle it is, because they just bring it in slowly but surely, and then it passes off as being that this is now the way it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. And going back to the scraps guys, they're rebelling against the system. But as you said, you made a good point. They have no real long-term plan. They're just it's just about surviving. But there doesn't seem to be any way out. And that's where, we got to look at where we are right now. I think we do have to survive. We have to kind of get through this. But we have to make a kind of a plan as to where, if we eventually beat this system, which I think we will, because I'm not sure this will ever come through, will ever materialize, because it's it's based on bullshit, basically, the whole system, and it's gonna collapse on itself, I think, in time. But it's like, where are we going to be at that time, and how do we start up a society which actually works this time for everybody, and we can do it right the next time, So, that's my thoughts on that.
All right. Yeah. So we're coming towards the end, and as you said, Brizer, you can't do that. That's illegal. That's against the law. And in this film, I think there's a scene. Yeah. They had a franchise war, and the only restaurant left is Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
And when they're there, I think Spartan, he asks for salt, and they immediately like, oh my God, salt? That was outlawed. Salt is bad for you. And you said there, Brizer, about raw milk. Like I saw an excellent meme a few months back, and it showed a glass of raw milk, and it said the government won't let you buy this. And then in the next pane, it had, an energy drink, like it has something like 25 spoonfuls of caffeine in it or something. It says, but
electrolytes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got electrolytes. Yeah, exactly. So it's like the government will let you buy this, and you have to scratch your head and say, what the hell's going on? Like this energy drink is going to kill you. Raw milk is supposed to be like cyanide the way they talk about it. But there is a very good quote. I'll try and find it before we wrap up. It's where Friendly is talking about the kind of world he wants to live in. And I'll try and find the quote. But suffice it to say that at the very end of the movie, Spartan, he defeats Phoenix. I mentioned that at the beginning in the synopsis of the movie. And it's left to the people then to decide what kind of society they want. Some of them, they want to keep this totalitarian system in place. Others, obviously the scraps, they want a kind of libertarian existence. They want no rules whatsoever. And Spartan tells them, they should try to find the middle ground. Brizer, what would you give this movie out of 10? And do you have any final comments on it?
Yeah, I'll give it about a 6, I think. It's mainly an action movie. If you were to watch it for the first time, and you just looked at it without going, thinking deeper into it, that's all you'd see. And it's kind of, there's comedy in it as well. And so, yeah, if you were going to the movies to watch this for the first time or whatever, you'd enjoy it. Yeah, it's not bad, But there's some very good stuff in there, which does make you think where we are right now. Final thoughts. A thought came to my head there now, and I kind of went out again. There's that choice between do we want a world full of rules, or do we a world of no rules? I see this debate between people who like government, who want rules, and then you got people who would identify themselves as like anarchists or libertarian types who want very little rules or hardly no rules. And how do you find a proper balance? And it's an interesting dynamic, that one, because if you're free, there should be really no rules. You should just have your own rules. But the golden rule is you don't cause harm or loss to anybody else. But there still has to be a structure to society. And if someone does go against those rules, so to speak, like where's the justice going to come from, And there is that kind of debate, and because even though anarchy doesn't actually mean chaos, it just means without rulers. It could get chaotic, though, if there isn't a kind of a structure in place that people will adhere to. And I just don't think that humanity is evolved enough right now to live in a society like that, because there's just so many people are just so different in many ways, and they got different ways of thinking and different opinions on different things, that there's always going to be arguments and friction among people. And who's going to be the arbiter there? Who's going to come in and say, okay, let's sort this out? I've looked at the Brehon laws of Ireland, the ancient Brehon laws of Ireland, which I would say as close to natural law as you can get. And they had a situation where there was really kind of no rules, but there was a standard that people were expected to adhere to. And there was punishment if you didn't go along with it. Now, they didn't actually have a death penalty, but what they did do was, this is where the word outlaw comes from, by the way. You would be outlawed. In other words, you'd be put out into the wild and try and live out there on your own and see how you go. Or another way they do it is they bring you out into the middle of the ocean among the high waves and just leave you there in a raft and let nature deal with you, you know. So I think that's a pretty good way of getting people to, you know, rethink their situation. It's a difficult one to know where we'll go on this one, you know, because I was looking, for example, at Switzerland, and I was talking to Ogner about this. I sent him this documentary on Switzerland, how it's a very bureaucratic society where they've got these litter wardens who are literally out spying on people who put bags of rubbish into the garbage cans on the street, and they'll fine them. Pretty big fines on this, you know. And you know, if you cross the road at a pedestrian crossing and you don't wait for the green man to come up and give you the okay to cross, you could get fined for that. A lot of these types of things kind of would annoy me in a way, and I wouldn't go along with it. But that's the way the Swiss kind of like to live that way, and I think you see that in quite a few European countries and Scandinavia and places like that as well. They kind of have that kind of way of living. It's very controlled, and government has a big say in everything. But then what's the opposite then? Do you just not care about anything, or do you just throw your garbage anywhere and let somebody else clean it up? It's all about responsibility, I think, at the end of the day. And are we at that stage yet in our development as a human species? You know, we're supposed to have evolved. Somehow, I don't think we have. I think we've kind of devolved quite a bit. But can we get back to that point where people just inherently know that you don't do this and you don't do that, and you don't need rules to tell you this? You just know. You know, you just inherently know. So, final thoughts. Yeah, a good movie, worth watching. Just for the comparisons between what this film was made in '93. So we're now 2024, so nearly 31 years later, and watch the comparisons to what you see now. And it's kind of it's in your face. It's right there. And it's moving towards that 2030 kind of timeline. So, are we? Is that where we're going to go? Because I certainly would not like to live in this kind of pacifist utopia of rules everywhere. You know, I think, as I said, there has to be some kind of rules, but we all know inherently what the rules are. We don't need anybody else to tell us what they are. We just kind of know. So, anyway, back to you on that.
All right, thanks very much, Brizer. So for people listening, I recommend you follow Brizer on Twitter. I'll put a link in for his Twitter handle. And I would give this film probably 7.5. I think it's very funny in parts as well. It's a bit like Idiocracy in the way that it's showing you a possible world in the future, and at the same time it's making light of it. So I do like that cynicism that's attached to it. I'll close this out by, and by the way, people, if possible, just hit the like for this video and share it around so that more people can listen to it. I'll finish this off by quoting from Edgar Friendly, the quote-unquote leader of the Scraps. And this is his philosophy. And Brizer mentioned, anarchists and all that. You know, I think it can be useful as a stepping stone. The problem is you have some anarchists and they think that all you need is anarchy and then everything's fine. As a stepping stone, it might be useful in certain situations, but then obviously you have to move on from that, I think, because there are a lot of people, and we saw them throughout the scamdemic. They don't seem to know. They don't seem to have any innate morality. They're waiting for someone to give them that morality. And it's better you step in and give it to them rather than some total psychopath. So here's Edgar Friendly's quote. You see, according to Cocteau's plan, I'm the enemy because I like to think. I like to read. I'm into freedom of speech and freedom of choice. I'm the kind of guy likes to sit in a greasy spoon and wonder, gee, should I have the T-bone steak or the jumbo rack of barbecued ribs with the side order of gravy fries? I want high cholesterol. I want to eat bacon and butter and buckets of cheese, okay? I want to smoke Cuban cigar the size of Cincinnati in the non-smoking section. I want to run through the streets naked with green jello all over my body, reading Playboy magazine. Why? Because I suddenly might feel the need to, okay, pal? I've seen the future. Do you know what it is? It's a 47-year-old virgin sitting around in his beige pajamas, drinking a banana broccoli shake, singing, I'm an Oscar Mayer winner.